Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today, it is time to have a look once again at the suggestions passed to the developers of December 2019, and this time we're on to helicopters. So after looking at the aviation stuff, after looking at the ground and the naval, helicopters is the next stage, and then we have mechanics and miscellaneous maps and stuff like that, which will probably be split into two videos. This helicopter one should only be one video, which will be nice. The first topic, which is up, is the A64D Apache Longbow. This is from Kev2Go, and this is pretty much talking about, of course, the Apache that we're not exactly sure if it's coming to the game soon, but it's looking like it is when it comes to it. You know, obviously, this machine overall, there is a bunch of Apaches sat in the files right now, and the H64D is one of those ones which is kind of just sat there as something which could be added pretty soon. So the first part is, of course, the history of it. It also involves another helicopter which was passed a while back, the AH-56 Cheyenne. I believe it was passed in either October or November last year, and the Apache story starts there. So after the cancellation of the AH-56 Cheyenne in favor of other projects such as the US Air Force Thunderbolt and also the Marine Corps Harrier, the US Army still needed an aircraft to fill an anti-armor attack role that would still be under the Army command. Now, there was a bit of a problem with this for the Army because of something that was signed in 1948. The Key West Agreement stopped the Army from owning combat fixed-winged aircraft. So therefore, the Army wanted an aircraft which was better than the AH-1 Cobra in firepower, performance, and range, but it couldn't be fixed-wing. So they pretty much had to go, for some sort of helicopter idea. So it would. They also needed something that would have the maneuverability for terrain following nap on Earth flying, and also to this end, the US Army issued a request for proposals for an Advanced Attack Helicopter, or AAH, on the 15th of November 1972. So as a sign of importance to the project, in September of 1973, the Army designated its 5 most important projects as the Big Five, which also included the AAH, so they saw this as one of the large projects that were going on at the time. So proposals were submitted by several companies: Bell, Boeing Vertol, Grumman Team, also Hughes, Lockheed, and Sikorsky. And by July 1973, the US Department of Defense had selected the finalists, being Bell and Hughes Aircraft's Toolco Aircraft Division, which would eventually become Hughes Helicopters. This began phase 1 of the competition, and each company built prototype helicopters and went through a flight test program. The Hughes model was the YAH-64A prototype, and it first flew on the 30th of September 1975, and the Bell model, the YAH-63A prototype, first flew on the 1st of October 1975. And after looking at the test results, the Army selected the Hughes YAH-64A over the Bell's one, pretty much because it was more damage tolerant because of its 4-blade main rotor setup, and also the YAH-63 had an issue with its tricycle landing gear arrangement where it was incredibly unstable. So they pretty much went for the 64 because it was tougher and it was also easier to use. In 1981, there were 3 pre-production AH-64As which were given to the US Army for operational test 2, and the Army testing of these vehicles was very successful. It was also decided, though, after the testing that they needed to upgrade these vehicles via just general power. So they added the T700 GE701 version of the engine. This gave it 1690 SHP, and the AH-64 was named the Apache in late 1981, and it also kept with the reason why it was named that was obviously the American Indian tribal names for its helicopters, and we see this all the way through, helicopter production for the Americans. It was also approved for full-scale production in 1982, so this thing really, when you think about it, after just a year of basic testing on the 3 pre-production AX-64s, was pretty much ready to go. And in 1983, the first production helicopters were rolled out at Hughes Helicopters facility at Mesa, Arizona. Hughes Helicopters was then purchased by McDonnell Douglas for $470 million in 1984, insane amount of money, and the helicopter unit later became part of the Boeing Company, with the merger of Boeing and McDonnell Douglas in 1997. And in 1986, the AH-64A cost around about $7 million, and the average unit cost was approximately $13.9 million in total costs. And the full-scale production of the AH-64A, which is of course the first model, was created, as we said, in 1983. But this article is about the AH-64D. So what is the differences between the AH-64A, which was the first production model, and this? Well, the AH-64D was pretty much just a further development. It entered service in 1998, and it was equipped with a glass cockpit, GPS aided navigation. It also had access to the FLIR capable targeting camera and also various other sensors. It's also had access to the IHADSS, which is the Integrated Helmet and Display Sighting System. Can you imagine if that ever got to War Thunder? That would have been that would be incredibly interesting. And also, it added what was continued on was the abilities for the pilot or the gunner to slave the helicopter's 30mm automatic chain gun from his helmet, so making the gun track head movements to point at where he looks. How crazy would that be? You know, we already have head tracking in War Thunder, but adding that in would be amazing. The biggest improvement, though, which is the one that everybody knows about, is of course the fact that the AN/APG-78 Longbow millimeter wave fire control radar was added. This was a target acquisition system, and the radar frequency interferometer as well, the RFI, which was housed in a dome located above the main rotor. It's that big kind of cylindrical thing on top. And what this basically meant is it was able to have target detection while the helicopter was behind obstacles. So putting it obviously above the above the rotors means that it could technically see when other people could not see. It, which was pretty cool. And also the AN/APG-78 was capable of simultaneously tracking up to 128 targets and engaging up to 16 at once. So an attack could also be initiated in 30 seconds. So in 30 seconds you could technically target up to 16 people at once and hit them all at the same time. Insane when it comes to how actually good stuff like the Hellfire was at the time and is today. There was also a radio modem integrated with the sensor suite, which allowed the data to be shared with ground units and other Apaches, allowing them to fire on targets detected by a single helicopter. So you could technically have what would be known as a scout helicopter, and then over the hills come everything else when it comes to, the amount of damage coming to the enemy. Also, the engines were upgraded as well to T700 GE701Cs, and the forward fuselage was expanded to accommodate new systems to improve survivability, navigation, and also tactical internet communication capabilities. And in 2003, the first Block 2 Apaches were delivered to the US Army, featuring digital communications upgrades. Now, when we have a look at the general armament of this machine, of course, the thing that we find is something which is, incredibly dangerous in the form of the Hellfire. Now, the Hellfire already exists in the game, but the question is, will it exist, as it is in the game going forward, especially as we get more of them? Because there is, of course, the AGM-114B, you have the AGM-114C, and then the AGM-114F, which is known as the interim Hellfire. Also, you have later versions, such as the AGM-114L, which are fire-and-forget radar-guided missiles, so it would be very much interesting to see something like that. But if you want the general statistics on the armament of this machine, obviously it has the 30mm chain gun, 1200 rounds, and it's obviously below the cockpit area. Then it has 4 hard points or 4 pylon stations on the stub wings, and then also longbows have a station on each wingtip where they can put a Stinger twin missile pack. So it could carry Hydras, CRV-7s, APKWSs, 2s I should say. These are incredibly modern rockets. And then you have, of course, Hellfire variants, Stingers, and also Spike missiles could be carried on this machine. So there's just a lot of stuff that is on offer. Also, of course, the Apache is seen as the best attack helicopter that exists at the moment by a lot of people. So a lot of people are looking forward to it, and I can understand why. The next vehicle to have a look at is the Westland Black Hawk, and this is from Terric G2014. And it's talking about a machine that probably isn't known too much about, at least in British service, because of course this is the US Sikorsky Black Hawk. This was an import version of the standard Black Hawk, and it was proposed on 3 different occasions to the UK government as a joint venture between Westland and Sikorsky to provide the army with a new heavy lift helicopter between the Lynx and the Chinook. You can actually see it right here. Being able to move stuff, which is very, very cool. The fact is, when it comes to it though, none of the proposals were successful, and the idea was ultimately dropped, and no Westland Black Hawks were ever bought. So 2 Black Hawk airframes were completed though, and outfitted with RTM322 engines, and were displayed and flown at Farnborough Air Show. And this is pretty much it when it comes to the Black Hawks in British service. They never actually got there. And there was also other interesting stuff about them. So Westland tried to export this idea to other countries, and it also, in one case, it ended up with accusations of trying to subvert armed restrictions. In the end, both of the completed airframes were changed to other Black Hawk configurations and eventually sold to Bahrain. Now, looking at the general use of this machine, if you want to know what weapons it could pretty much hold all of the modern stuff that we're incredibly used to. Hellfire missiles and a quad mount. It also has 4 external hardpoints, so very, very similar to a lot of other machines that we see. So Hellfires, then also Mantras in a quad mount, Hydra 70 rocket pods, Snebs, the Sea Skua, and also the Penguin, which would be cool to see, and gun pods in the form of 7.62s, 12.7s, or 20mm. So overall, very similar to a lot of other helicopters that we see today, but would be kind of nice instead of just everybody getting an Apache. Maybe Britain could get something slightly different. The next vehicle is from Miki Hoshi, and this is talking about the OH-1 Ninja. Now, the OH-1 Ninja is a vehicle which I personally find it odd that it was passed, but then again, you know, I know a lot of people are interested in it. It's just one of those things that I don't think it would fit the game too well. But anyway, let's get into the history. So, of course, if you don't know what the OH-1 is, it's a reconnaissance or observation aircraft. And the JGSDF decided that they needed to replace their OH-6Ds, which is their old observation helicopters. And they wanted to get a more advanced and more modern aerial scout. The result was Japan's first completely indigenous military helicopter design, which is why a lot of people are pushing for this. You know, it is a vehicle that, you know, is completely Japanese in a way. And it would have tandem seating, so, you know, you'd have 2 people, composite primary rotors, enclosed tail fin unit, and also a sensor turret located above the pilot. The OH-1 Ninja first flew in '96, so it is quite a modern vehicle, but then again, a lot of helicopters are, and it was powered by a pair of Japanese-designed and built Mitsubishi TS1 M10 engines. There was a total of 250 which were actually ordered, and it then entered service in 2000, but there definitely wasn't 250 that entered service. Eventually, when it came down to it, There wasn't a lot of them built. Only 38 total machines were actually manufactured, and only 37 operational in the JGSDF by 2019. So that shows you that, this, unfortunately, it couldn't live up to expectations, and that was because of a few problems. So the first one is that it seemed to have issues with its engines. So in 2015, a pair of OH1s suffered engine failures on the same day, and one actually crashed in the ocean. So since then, they were actually grounded. And then until just around March 2019, when they were cleared once again for operational flight. So this thing has definitely had a few issues. There is also talk of other ideas when it comes to this aircraft, more attacking versions of this instead of just a kind of scout reconnaissance one. So there was a utility helicopter which was proposed, the UHX program, but in 2013 it was found that some officers of the JGSDF and Kawasaki were bid rigging the UHS program. So because people found out about that, Kawasaki were forced to withdraw from the program. And then there was another project for the OH1 called the AHX, and the AHX program is a variant which is designed to be heavily armed with air-to-ground missiles and also rocket pods, but it isn't known if they're still working on the AHX program, especially after the kerfuffle that was, of course, the UHX stuff, which I'm sure brought shame to a lot of people's families. The other thing as well, when it comes to this vehicle, is one thing I haven't mentioned is armament, and that is really a simple reason. There is only one armament that this thing can have, and it's 4 Type 91 Kai air-to-air missiles. So this thing does not have any guns, it does not have any air-to-ground ordnance, it just has 4 air-to-air missiles, and that is it. It doesn't have anything else that is on it. And that is why I find it very odd that this thing was passed. It looks like a beautiful aircraft. It sings like a beautiful aircraft, but at the same time, it only has access to 4 air-to-air missiles, and that is it. Which is, I don't understand why this thing got passed, if I'm honest. But then again, moving on to the next one, I can definitely understand why this was passed. This is the AH-64D Apache Longbow, but is the Fuji one. So this is once again from Miki Hoshi, and talking about the Japanese AH-64D. And just like the OH-1 that was designed to replace the OH-6D, even though it didn't replace the OH-6D, that's still in service today, the AH-64D for the Japanese was designed to replace the pre-existing AH-1Ss, but once again, didn't turn out like that. And in 2000, the replacement program was started to find something which would replace the AH-1S. The AH-64 was chosen, basically, to replace the AH-1Ss, and the other stuff that was also thought about is which version did they want, and they decided to go for the longbow version, the AH-64D, and the fact was, on August the 27th, 2001, it was announced that it was the winner of the replacement program. The aircraft was also able to mount all of the normal stuff that you see from the general AH-64D from the Americans, apart from a few internal systems. So the Japanese AH-64D would not have the IRCM on it, and also it would be able to carry some slightly different air-to-air missiles in the form of AIM-92 air-to-air missiles instead of Stinger ones, which we would be used to on the American version. Now, this also, the AH-64D for the Japanese, followed a similar story to what we talked about with the OH-1. So, even though it was chosen to be the replacement for it, they ordered 62 AH-64Ds, and the first ones were supposed to arrive in 2006, but because of increasing costs and also Boeing discontinuing the AH-64D production, this meant that only 13 were actually produced in 2013, and these were not equipped with the infrared jammers, and in 2017 it was announced that Lockheed Martin would modernize all 13 of Japan's AH-64 H-64Ds, but they only have 13 of them overall, which is not a large number. And these upgrades that they're talking about haven't actually taken place yet. They take place in 2020, so we'll have to revisit this topic when that actually happens. But due to the cancellation of the further production of the H-64D, the H-1S has still yet to be replaced. So it's still in service, just like the OH-64, the OH-6D is. Sorry, it gets a bit confusing sometimes with all the names. And the AHX program continues with rumored contenders, including all of the modern aircraft that you see today. The H-1Z, the H-64E, and the Tiger. And there are only now 12 H-64Ds remaining in JGSTF service because as of October 2018, because one of the helicopters was lost in a fatal accident. So there's only 12 overall, which is not a large number, but I suppose does mean that they still are around. So armament-wise, it has access to the M230A 130mm, also all of the Hellfires, so 16, the Hydra rockets, and the AIM-92 Stingers as well. So it does have access to Stingers. Sorry about that, I got a bit confused. The other thing is it doesn't get access to, when it comes to it, is all of the other air-to-air missile that I can't remember the name of. The Spike missiles. There we go. So the next one is looking at the Augusta A129 Mangusta, which of course is from Pieve, and this is an Italian helicopter for the Italian tech tree, and it is also one that we kind of already have in the game, but not in a huge way. We have one of the variants of the Mangusta. There are actually many variants of the Mangusta, which we'll go through in this. So the A129 was developed as the request of the Italian army, which saw the need to equip its air units with a dedicated attack vector and anti-tank capability. So the A129 was going to be the first dedicated attack helicopter fully designed and built in Western Europe, and its project began in 1978, and the final project was ready in 1982. And the fact was, it went through many different variants, it went through many different ideas, and overall it ended up in a pretty decent attack helicopter overall. The name itself was chosen in a kind of interesting way by the Italian army, and the Augusta, which was, of course, its name, was the Mangusta, and the trade name was chosen because the A129 was a direct competitor to the Bell A1 Cobra that at the time rivaled the Augusta project. And there is a nice little thing in brackets saying the Mongoose is known for its ease in killing poisonous snakes. So there you go. The other thing also to mention is there was also in the development of the Mangusta, after a bunch of different prototypes were produced, there was a deal between a lot of governments in 1986. So the Italian government, the Dutch boys, and then the Spanish and the UK, they signed a memorandum of understanding to develop an improved version of the A129, called it the Joint European Helicopter, but the memorandum called for the installation of more powerful engines, a new rotor system, retractable landing gear, and also better sensors and more powerful weaponry. The project collapsed in 1990, though, when Great Britain and the Netherlands decided to buy the AH-64, and also Spain opted for the Eurocopter Tiger. So yeah, the Italians kind of got screwed in that one. But in the early 1990s, at least, the Augusta started working on a variant of the A129 Mangusta, which was aimed at the exported market. And the new version received improvements in the engines, avionics, and armaments to meet the demands of the export market. And due to these modifications for the Augusta, which by this point was Augusta Westland, which is why you see sometimes it being referred to as the AW129, the fact was, I'm not sure if anybody has picked it up in a large way, at least major competitors. So yeah, it's definitely interesting to see. One of the main components of the Mangusta was its crew survival and safety capability. It was designed to have impact resistance shielding or armor, I suppose you'd call it, from 12.7mm caliber ammunition. So this would be for the powertrain, the fuel tanks, and also the main rotors overall. The propellers were also positioned on the sides of the fuselage, well spaced from each other and separated by the transmission case to reduce the likelihood of simultaneous damage. And the fuel tanks also have an anti-explosion and anti-leak system consisting of a self-sealing system plus a complete extinguishing system, and the blades are constructed of highly resistant composite materials, increasing their ballistic resistance of the blades, being able to withstand various impacts of the 23mm caliber ammunition, providing safe flight capabilities even after being hit. So the main structure of the A129 also features an impact-absorbing anti-crash technology, which is also applied to crew seats, which together with the main landing gear set are designed to withstand the impact of which it gives. There was also some very, very modern versions of the Mangusta created, and these are actually still in service with a few other countries. I believe that Turkey also has one, or at least Turkey has access to some which have some interesting missiles on them. Let's just see if I can find the picture. It might just be Turkish missiles instead of, you know, the actual machine itself. Oops. Come on. I believe it's this one. I might be wrong, though. Yeah, it could be this. No, it's not this one. But anyway, the AW129 could also have access to stuff like Turkish Roketsan UMTAS missiles, which have a maximum range of 8 kilometers, and also guided Roketsan Sirit 70mm guided semi-active rockets. So that would be pretty cool. And let's just go through the variants of the Mangusta. So it was kind of interesting when the A129 was actually added to the game, because remember, it was added in the form of a premium. There was a lot of annoyance and a lot of discussion from many members of the Italian community about, well, this isn't the Mangusta. And the problem is, it is a Mangusta, but because there are so many different names and so many different variants for the Mangusta, it is not exactly easy to pinpoint them. And the problem is, they don't all have distinct names. So you have the Type 1. This was the completely smooth nose and with housing for the tow viewer, but without the tow viewer, which this was the experimental one. You had the Type 2, which had a nose with the Hughes M65 visor for pointing and guiding the US tow missile. The M65 was also born in the 70s to equip the AH-1 Cobra, and in Italy it was mounted for the first time on the A109 tow starting from June 1976, and there was also empty housing on the right for the PNVS, which is the pilot night vision system, and the pilot's night vision apparatus. This was also seen as experimental. The Type 3, the nose had access to the M65 pointer, the PNVS FLIR in position. This was also experimental. Then you had the Type 4. This was a definitive snout adopted for operative specimens destined for the Italian army. The M65 was replaced with the Swedish Saab heli tow targeting system, and the housing for the PNVS was also still visible, but it was empty, at least in the picture. Then the Type 5, you have the complete face of the heli tow and the PNVS. I'll actually show you the picture just so you can get an idea of this, because there is just so many bloody variants of the damn thing, and they all are slightly different to each other. You could make a whole tech tree just out of the different, you know, mechanics that these things would bring. So here are all of the general faces and variants that you can see right here. There we go. And so we're on to the Type 6. This is the Augusta experimental nose. Had a 20mm Otto Breda TM197B Gatling cannon and PNVS. The side structures also contain the blows of the Gatling, but they were never installed on the Italian Army specimens. The cannon was initially available only on the A129 International Export variant, and it was introduced in 1992 and powered by two powerful and modern T800 turbo shafts. This was also experimental. The Type 7 is just the A129 CBT, then the Type 8 is the T129, the original Saab Heli-Tow and the PNVS were replaced by a new integrated system with FLIR, TV, rangefinder, and also laser pointer, the ASEL FIR 300T from Aselsan Turka. Then the last one, the Type 9, was a snout of the AH-129D or ARH-129D presented in 2011. The D variant does without the heli-tow, replaced in this case by the Israeli optronic turret, the Rafael Toplight 3. Do you see how confusing it can be? Then you have all of the variants on top of it, which we haven't even talked about. So those are just the variants of the nose, and this is the variants of the overall machine. So you've got the A1298 Tunguska. This is the original production version, powered by two Rolls-Royce engines, the Gem 2 1004Ds. Then you got the A129C, which is the combat version. It's got an updated version for the Italian army. It's basically got better avionics, it's got better engines, all of these wonderful things. Then you got the A129D. This is a modernized version of the CBT model with systems developed for the AW129 International, and it also received a new set of 5-blade propellers or rotors, General Dynamics M197 cannon, the Rafael Toplight 3 EOS, the electro-optical system tower, and the Spike ER missile launch system. This is the one that people wanted to see in the game and were confused why we didn't have it. The general specifications for the 129 Mangusta is that it has a 20mm Gatling type cannon in the bottom of it, and then you have access to 4 sets of rocket pods in the form of 81mm, 70mm, or just 12.7mm gun pods. Then you have access to 8 Hellfires or TOW anti-tank missiles, or 4 to 8 Stingers or Mistral anti-aircraft missiles. So very similar to a lot of vehicles, that we've seen overall. Now the last vehicle is this. This is from Gale, and it's talking about the SA3160, the Alouette 3, the armed version of it. Obviously the Alouettes in general, if you want to have a look, this is a picture of it. A lot of Alouettes in general were used for their role of moving people or scouting or general, ambulance roles and stuff like that, airlifting people, but there was also some armed version, and this is the SNCASO 3164 Cannon variant. This was an Anglo-French project in 1964, and it was designed to create a common attack helicopter which could be used on multi-purpose platforms. The British Army settled on the Lynx at the time, so therefore, they were kind of out of the race. So the French pursued their efforts on the Alouette and came up with the SO3164 cannon, and this was armed with an MG151 cannon manned by the co-pilots, which you can see in the picture, which is just completely hilarious. And then also, it had access to 4 AS-10 ATGMs. The project was then given to the Rhodesian Air Force as a cheap attack helicopter, but the modification significantly altered the performance of the helicopter, and the project was eventually abandoned. The Rhodesian Army did modify their Alouette 3s afterwards, but they didn't keep the MG151 in the cockpit. So therefore, what you see here is basically the initial version of it, if you want to see it like that. But this vehicle could carry 4 SS-11s or SS-10s or AS-10s, so a decent amount of ground attacking capabilities. It could also carry a 50 cal MG or the MG151, which is of course the one you see in the picture here, manned by the co-pilot, and the rockets, it could carry 6 37mm rocket pods. It could also carry 75 rocket pods, 2 of them, or 4 sets of 57mm rocket pods, which was from the IAR-316B, which we already have in the game. So yeah, it's a pretty cool little machine, and also would offer something different at the lower tiers of helicopters. Hopefully at some point we see it. It wouldn't be too much of a hassle since we already have the Alouettes in game. You could just make a significant premium or significant interesting version on it. But overall, a lot of modern helicopters, a lot of stuff that I'm sure will eventually come into the game, but it also shows me how limited the scope of helicopter design is. Everything nowadays is incredibly similar to each other, and hopefully at some point, we get the wonderful and the ridiculous, like this SA-3160. I think that will be much more fun to use instead of vehicles which all have the same capabilities. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Ambrosius McClellan, B. Young, Blackie, Chris Giltnane, Daniel Stanton, Jay Wilt, John Ryman, Martinez, Moxie, Super Cacti, Trigger Hippie, Eugens Terry, and also Elove Goat and Samuel Slick for supporting the channel.